So this was a section from my new composition for choir, which I'm very excited about, and today I want to share some parts of the music with you and also talk a little bit about my ideas about it and how the piece actually relates to the present times that we're in. So in this past August, I started writing a piece for choir as kind of a discovery exercise, just using my creative muscle a little bit more aside from my usual work in performing. And I set a passage to music, a biblical text, and I want to just set the scene a little bit for you. It's about Jesus and his disciples on the Sea of Galilee. And they know this place very well. It's kind of their home area where Jesus is from, and most of the disciples as well. And it's a calm evening, probably a beautiful sunset. They're on the boat, and everything is calm until a wind gradually picks up and actually develops into a very violent windstorm. Now, the disciples, several of them are fishermen and are very experienced at sea, but these waves are very big and starting to crash over the sides of the boat, and the boat is beginning to fill with water. So they are starting to panic and are afraid for their lives. So eventually they wake Jesus, who has been sleeping, and say, "Teacher, Rabbi, don't you see that we are perishing?" And Jesus gets up and he speaks to the wind and to the waves, and he says, "Peace, be still." And in that moment, everything becomes calm. And the disciples, they had already seen Jesus perform many miracles, heal people, but that he would actually speak to a storm and the storm would obey him, that completely blows their mind. They are just awestruck with wonder about who this man Jesus really is. I've called this piece Jesus and the Storm. And when I was looking for a text set to music, I chose something that would give me enough possibilities as a composer to create a very colorful canvas of sound. And a storm with the wind and the waves, that of course provides enough possibilities to, very vividly express the drama happening. But aside from that point, I find that the image of the storm actually is able to represent also the season, the current season that almost everyone on this planet has been experiencing at the same time. And there's a lot for us to learn from the very different responses of Jesus and the disciples to the storm. So let's dive in. The beginning of the piece starts with just a couple of verses to set the scene and help us mentally become a part of it and get into the boat with the disciples. So it's been a long day. Jesus has been teaching a large crowd many parables. The disciples probably haven't understood half of it. And everyone is tired. And Jesus then says, "Let's get into the boat and cross to the other side." So he gets in and takes a nap, and the disciples row the boat out onto the water. Now, an interesting question is, how do you compose music for the words of Jesus in order to distinguish it from regular speech? Like in the Bible, sometimes you see red letters for the words of Jesus. And the composer Bach, for example, he would have strings accompany the words that are being sung by Jesus to create kind of a musical halo around it. And in the beginning of my piece, for the words where Jesus says, "Let us go across to the other side," I do have the whole choir sing those words, but I have the men sing a little louder, so the tenors and basses, and they carry the melodic function of it, and that sounds like this. And then the women in the choir add the upper register, and they add the harmony to it, which creates a similar kind of sonic halo effect, which sounds like this. So the lower and middle register represents Jesus as the man, and then the upper register in the choir adds the dimension of his divine glory atmosphere to it. The rest of the introduction doesn't give away anything yet of what is to come. Everything is calm and peaceful. Everything is still at sea until there's a little bit of a breeze. A little bit stronger and higher. And now. Let me skip forward to the part where the boat begins to fill up with water. And you'll hear the start on just one single note, very softly, that every section of the choir comes in on in staggered entrances, one after another. It starts on this note, and what you'll hear is that as the water begins to rise in the boat, the range in the music also increases in both directions, all the way up to 3.5 octaves. And listen for how, as the danger of drowning increases, how the music also becomes more and more dissonant in the process. At some point, the disciples are so afraid to die that they wake up Jesus and cry out to him. And the choir splits into 8 parts at this point to represent the different disciples. Now, I guess I could have split the choir into 12 parts because of 12 disciples, but that would be a stretch for a lot of choirs, and 8 gets the idea across as well. So you'll hear different sections of the choir interrupt each other as they're all crying out, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Here's the turning point in the piece. Jesus awakes. And he rebukes the wind and the sea. Now the disciples had just been shouting in C sharp minor, a very dark key with a lot of sharps. And when Jesus awakes, he takes it into an entirely different key and harmonic area and shifts the entire atmosphere. Before that, the disciples were afraid of dying, and he brings light and peace and calm into the situation. And I feel like that actually relates very much to our experience as humans often, where, like the disciples, we look at the circumstances and the waves, and we get overwhelmed and lose sight of the fact that God actually is right by our side and wants to go through the circumstances with us. He's there in the midst of it. And Jesus, he speaks to the waves and he says, "Peace, be still." And the storm immediately subsides. And the disciples now, they are completely overwhelmed by what just happened. They're stunned. Their concept of who Jesus is has been utterly blown apart. And I've composed this last section of the piece in a more slower and reflective mood, with the words that the disciples are asking themselves, questioning, who is this that speaks to the wind and the sea and they obey him? And that sounds like this. Sorry, I'm leaving you hanging on that cliff right there. You'll have to wait to hear the end of the piece until it is actually performed. In the beginning of this Bible passage, it says that there were other boats with Jesus. The disciples' boat was not the only boat in the storm. And maybe this past year has caught up the whole world in the same storm, but there are different boats, and everyone can choose to be either in a boat by themselves or to be in the boat with Jesus, who commands the storm to be still. And after he speaks to the storm, he turns around to his disciples and he says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" Meaning, have you still no faith in who I am? Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.